Hello, I'm Ron Miscavige, and this is Life After Scientology. And that song you're listening to as we opened up the show is called Starship. And if you want to hear the rest of that, you can go to my website, therealronmiscavige.com. Go into where it says music and media and click on that, and the window will come down that will show you all the songs in the album I did. And that's one of them. And I don't know did we play this ever before? Sean, no? Okay, well, there you go. This is and it's called Starship. The real 70s type stuff, but it's a bit timeless because, some of the licks and the melodies I think could go with any era. Anyway, look, let's get ready for the show here. First off, I want to acknowledge some Patreons, and I appreciate very much your help. And any of you out there listening to this, if you'd care to help support the ongoingness. You know what? Is there any such word as ongoingness? I don't know, but I made it up one time and I like using it. So maybe I coined a new word, or maybe it actually exists. But anyway, if you want to support the ongoingness of this show, which is enlightening and informative and helpful to a lot of people, you can become a Patreon, and you can contribute anywhere from $2 to $200. Whatever you do, whether it's small or large, I appreciate it because it helps this, and I want to thank you. So here, Paulette Cooper, $5 at Patreon. Thank you very much, Paulette. Okay, there's acknowledgement out to you. And then Kirsty Sundell. I hope I'm not murdering that last name. Kirsty Sundell, also $5. New Patreons. Thank you very much. So that's out of the way. And again, if you ever want to become a Patreon, just go to therealronmiscavige.com, and you can pull down the window where it says Patreon and join up. So now let's get on with the show, though, because I have a special guest today, and we're going to take a little bit of a different turn. I'm not going to talk about just Scientology and its abuses. I want to get into, and I've promised you that we would do this one day, and that day has arrived. I want to get into a discussion of cults in general and go over the various traits and the tenets that they all have, or most of them have, and we'll discuss how it varies from group to group. But I have a special guest on today, and he is an expert on cults, and he's an expert because he's investigated them. He isn't just talking out of the... Well, I wouldn't use the expression. Let me think of a cleaner one. He isn't just talking out of his head. He has experience and he has knowledge, and I welcome him to the show. And his name is Jeff Holiday. So, hello, Jeff.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you being on. And anyway, to kick it off, let's start with a couple things. Well, all of the things are going to be, I think, of interest to people, and that is this. We're going to go over the similarities and differences with the different cults and see if there are many differences, or is it mostly similarities. And what I'd like to kick off with first is this. There is usually in a cult, well, not usually, I think it's always, and you can correct me on this, Jeff, you have an authoritarian figure. Like in Scientology, it was L. Ron Hubbard. Do you want to go into some of the other cults and how this works and what their authority is in it?
Yeah, there is usually some sort of central authority figure. It can sometimes be made up of a council, but for the most part, a lot of it, and even this comes down to pseudoscience cults as well, there is usually somebody who is the possessor of either a sacred knowledge or an unknown truth. And in some cases, there's things like, like Rajneeshpuram, for example. This is a divine creature. But yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say that one of the most prevalent commonalities between all different types of cults is a lot of times a cult of personality. Like there is a central figurehead. Like for instance, there's sorry.
Okay, we're okay now. Yeah, we're fine now. Oh, well, now, okay, let me add something to that. Heaven. In other words, it's a person that you have to go through either to get forgiven of sins or maybe gain sacred knowledge to achieve a great afterlife in eternity. Do you find this true, or am I
Yeah,
just...
if it's a religious or faith based cult, then yeah, that's they're basically like the gatekeeper to reward. They're the gatekeeper towards either an afterlife or some sort of spiritual enlightenment. Like you have to appease them or you have to play by their rules. And in other ones, take for instance, like maybe they're trying to sell you on some alternative health treatment. You have to basically appease them and follow their tenets and their dictates in order to be healthy, to even survive, and in some cases they believe to even live forever. So yeah.
I never thought about it in terms of being like a health routine or a regimen.
Oh
But
yeah.
you have a hell of a point there, because that opens up another ball of wax here.
It's the behavior. That's one of the reasons why I got so interested in doing the pseudoscience stuff, is because I had this fascination with cults, and damn near every bit of it you can very easily put these groups into it. I mean, these are people who, with a religious reverie, you can have people who commit grievous acts of self-harm, flaying their skin, uh, doing all sorts of horrible things to their bodies. And then you have people who will literally abuse their children because they believe that this substance or this cure is the way to get healthy. And for them, being healthy or being cured is their own version of like an afterlife or a reward when you basically line these things up together. It's really fascinating.
Wow. Okay. Now, there's another thing that, well, in Scientology, you have to go on study 2.5 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Basically, what it amounts to is not just gaining knowledge, but continually indoctrinating you into a new way of thinking, or putting L. Ron Hubbard at the source of all of this uh, vital wisdom that you need in order to lead a better life and a better afterlife. So, but it's done on a daily basis. Is this prevalent in other cults? Do they have things like this where you...
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, damn near any religious or faith-based one has they're trying to think of which word I want to use specifically for it, but yeah, there could be daily study or daily penance. It can even be something as simple as well, like the Rajneeshpuram one is really fascinating to me because it was in my state. It was over in the eastern part of Oregon in the desert.
Wait a minute. What was that word you just said? The what?
The Rajneeshpuram.
Okay.
And this one was fascinating because it was a massive compound. It was all centered around one holy figure. There were murders that happened because of it. All sorts of corruption. They bought an entire town. Wild stuff. And yeah, there's definitely a participation to it. I think that one is probably more more of a part of the point when it comes to a faith-based things that are more pseudoscience are more reliant upon like your participation or your continued, you could even call it missionary work.
Yeah.
This one's actually pretty interesting, is there's certain cults like the CD autism, Jim Humble, Carrie Rivera cult, and it is a cult 100%. And part of your participation isn't just in doing these horrible things, but you need to educate others and recruit, and that's almost their daily task as well.
I see. But is there anything like they would say a certain prayer every day, or like I know that is it the Muslims that bow down toward Mecca and 5 times a day they recite a prayer while they're
Oh sure.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. There's I live in Eugene, and Eugene is a absolute hive of pseudo spiritualistic beliefs and practices. Thankfully, most of them are pretty benign, and they're not necessarily centered around like a cult-like figure. But the ones that do, one of the most common ones is, and you'll hear this all over the place, is intention. And so they do like their daily mantras, their daily recitations of what they want their intention to be for that day. And for them, a lot of these people are former Christians or former other types of religions. For them, that replaces prayer. That replaces, the catechism, for example.
Yeah. In other words, you're talking about like a to-do list that you make up every day.
It's more like, you ever seen those inspirational posters where it'll have some photograph, and it'll have like your daily affirmation, like go out today and make sure that this is this is this is this.
Yeah.
But for them, it's more than just simply a I need to do good, or this is what I need to do for the day. For them, it takes the place of I'm going to put my energy out into the universe. I'm going to visualize and manifest the things that I want to do. It's very self-help. And
Yeah.
that's where, like, when you really get into the psychology of cults and pseudoscience and that sort of thing, so much of this shares the same psychology as the self-help industry. It's huge,
Yeah.
huge how close they are.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. I don't think all what we could call cults
Mm.
are necessarily bad.
No, sure, no,
I
yeah,
mean, when we talk of a cult, you have that unspoken underlying uh, idea that this cult is bad, and a lot of them are bad. They take your money, they just fool you, they'll ruin your life. But if you want to talk about, I'll give you an example. Let's say the Boy Scouts. They probably think to themselves, every day I got to do a good deed, I got to help somebody, I got to honor my parents, and this is inculcated into them as their way of living. And the
absolutely.
end result is you get a kid who's industrious, he's nice to people. That's not a bad cult, but you wouldn't call it a cult yet. It almost has the feeling of being a cult because of the way uh, people commit themselves every day. You see what I'm
Sure.
saying?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's
So I think what is the end result of being a member of a cult? Is it destructive or is it constructive? And I guess we could categorize bad cults and good cults that way. Do you see what I'm saying?
yeah, absolutely. There are definitely cults that are ultimately benign. The different power structures that are going on between the higher ups versus the adherents to their belief. There are definitely some benign ones out there, and a lot of it too is because this is one of the things that makes this so fascinating. Because this type of psychology, like I said, there's a mixture between religiosity cults, pseudoscience cults, cults of personality, simply the self-help industry, and also groups of people as they cluster around ideas, central tenets, and concepts, even politically. No politics, but this is why it's so nefarious, because when you're utilizing something that is so natural for human beings, and that's clustering in groups and
Yeah.
rallying around a centralized idea,
Yeah.
the real cult, the ones that I pay attention to are the ones that specifically are designed to bring people in using those tactics and then abuse them.
Okay.
That's like the main part of it for me.
Well, that it to me, that's what we're talking about today. Not the other
Absolutely.
I would consider uh, good. In other words, the result of being a member of these, as you would say, benign cults is that
Mhm.
you're doing good for society. It's a constructive thing. But if we're talking about, as example, the Church of Scientology, and there was just uh, a program on Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I don't think I did see that one actually.
A&E just kicked off their year with this
Wow.
special, and
Cool.
Do you know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses as an example?
Not exactly too much about Jehovah's Witnesses. The one that I started looking into recently was Mormonism, because they had a bit of their more radical concepts revealed recently, and that really blew me away, like a lot, a whole lot. The
Well,
whole idea of them having
give
like secret code. Sorry.
give us an example of the radical concepts.
One of them was that they're forced to memorize these codes, these secret codes that they can't talk about, and they can't really even reveal much of it. And the whole idea behind this is that they have to understand and have these codes memorized so that when they die and go to heaven, they can prove their value and their worth to be admitted into heaven. They have to basically plead with and convince their guardian angels to let them into heaven with these like secret codes. It's so strange, so bizarre.
You know, this is new to me. I didn't know that. I'm glad you're bringing this up because,
Yeah.
like, who makes up these codes? Is it a group of people, or is it one person, or what?
I don't know. I just got clued into this like 4 days ago, I believe. And yeah, I haven't even gotten a chance to really sit down and look at it as much as I want to, but it just sounded like such an interesting concept. I mean, Mormonism on its own is fascinating. You know, you got the man responsible for it. Joseph Smith had a shady history to begin with. Why anybody was willing to specifically believe him, let alone follow him into a very radicalized concept.
Okay, before you go any further, give us an example of his shady history, because I know about it, but our audience might not know.
Oh man, I'm a little bit on the spot with that. I don't want to misquote what exactly was wrong with him. Wasn't he was a con man, wasn't he?
There you go. I mean,
Yeah, he
that
was
says
trying
a
to
lot.
con people out of money.
He was a con man.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's wild. I mean, that's one of the things too that I think is very common with most cults, and this spans all of them. Well, at least the malignant ones are usually these centralized figures have shady pasts, and they're sometimes I think it's important that their beliefs be so radical, because that allows them to utilize a persecution complex. Like, well, obviously, you know, the government or those people or our enemies label me as such because my ideas are so revolutionary and radical, and they want to keep you under control.
Right.
Which is fascinating, because being in a cult is giving somebody control of you. You know.
Yeah, that's very true, because this is how Scientology works, because L. Ron Hubbard considered a lot of people his enemies, like
Mhm.
psychiatry and various other people and groups, the government. And he said at one point he had to go out to the sea to get away from land masses to do his research. Well, the fact of the matter is he was on the lam.
Tax evasion, I believe, right?
You know, everybody's after you for one thing or another, and they all aren't lying, you know.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
he was on the lam. Well, I'll tell you one thing I proved with him. He had a very creative mind.
Mm.
And I think, is this a common denominator of these cult leaders, that they, in their, they're just creativity. They can make up stuff, and it appeals to a lot of people, but it's just made up.
I'd say a lot of it. There are some interesting outliers. For instance, here's a really fascinating one. There's this guy by the name of Brazzo. Brazzo I believe, is an Eastern European man. I'm not exactly sure, but his whole shtick is people come from all over the world to go to his appearances, and what'll happen is they'll get everybody pumped up about it. They'll have a speaker out there, like, and maybe some actors coming up saying Brazzo healed me, cured me of this, cured me of that. Everybody in the crowd's getting all whipped up in this hypnotic frenzy. Brazzo comes out. This is what he does. He stares at you. That's it. He just stares at you, and people are like, "Oh, I'm healed from my cancer." But the thing is, Brazzo is not one of those wildly creative types. He's actually, and this is really well understood, he was the understudy of an extremely charismatic man who ran a cult way before that and took him under his wing. And Brazzo, when that guy died, took over his flock, hired a PR manager, and went worldwide.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And all he does is stare.
All he does is stare. The healing gaze of Brazzo. It's wonderful.
Well, I tell you, people are taking in with this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
People are taking in. And actually, in Scientology, you find a lot of very creative minds, people who aren't necessarily like down and outers. I mean, there was an appeal to it, which is basically that if you followed this and then you passed it on to everybody else, you could literally help every man, woman, and child to lead a better life. So there was like a constructive goal to go after by becoming a Scientologist. And I know in the early days, it was completely different than the way it is now. It was like free.
It was all about the concept. It was all about the helping. Yeah.
Exactly. And of course, in those days, you didn't have the internet, so you couldn't check on any of this stuff. And you just thought, well, this is a great idea. I'm gonna become a part of this, because you get helped. There's stuff in the very, very beginning that is very helpful. And I don't know if this is the case with other cults, but some of the things in the very beginning of Scientology are helpful and do make you more capable of handling life, to a large or small degree. And you think, oh shit, if this does it for me, let me get other people to get involved in this. And you got great artists and good thinking minds, but
yeah, there's kind of
you realize it's a con. That's all.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Absolutely. One of the things I find really interesting too is I'd say that's very common with a lot of other cults and a lot of other groups. Unless you get into, say, doomsday cults. Doomsday cults are really interesting, or the ones that are like hardcore isolationists that are all centered around the end of the world. Those are usually, and those are the dangerous, really, really dangerous ones, like Jonestown.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a thing. 900 people in a mass suicide. But those doomsday cults are usually not necessarily about the betterment of humanity or the betterment of society. For them, it's their Noah's Ark. That this is the way that they will survive, or they will ascend to the next level.
Right.
But the pseudoscience ones have usually benign messaging, which it's not actually. It's all marketing. For instance, the one I'm most well known for was Jilly Juice. This woman trying to get people to drink fermented salty cabbage water, which compels excessive and violent diarrhea, and she believes it'll cure cancer and AIDS, regrow arms, all sorts of stuff. And she also believes it can make you live forever. And on her Facebook, before she went on the Dr. Phil show, she's absolutely convinced that if she goes there and she puts this out on national television, that she is going to be responsible for making humanity live forever. Like, this is going to be the global wake upness. Our consciousness will be enlightened by this. And so in her mind, there is this benign, even messianic kind of psychology going on. And for her followers, they really believe this kind of stuff too. But deep down, like, there is a very dark, nefarious side to it.
Now, let me ask you something. A person like that, do you think that underneath all of the words they say and all of the greatness that you're going to achieve by becoming part of it, do you think they really know, I'm really screwing people over, but I'm going to do it for the money?
Some do. That woman in specific, she is a true believer. But then you have people like Jim Humble and Carrie Rivera, who they're the ones responsible for the drink bleach or squirt bleach up autistic children's asses into their colon, which will cure their autism. Those people know that they're scamming people, and they know that because they're on the lam. They're hiding in South American countries. No, Latin American countries. I think one of them is in Mexico. But yeah, no, they absolutely know they're scamming people. They do. They're not true believers any more than anybody else. Like, no. But it depends. It depends. I'd say if there's a huge push for marketing a product, the less likely they are to be a true believer. And I believe that. I mean, you know what it always reminds me of, especially the ones who the very religious ones, they're very fringe society, religious cults. Those ones always remind me of those stories of like the traveling con man, back in
like with the
back.
carpet digger.
Yeah. They act almost exactly the same way, and I think a lot of them probably are very, very well aware that they're malicious.
You said something I think is a key to it: the push to marketing a product to get you to spend money on something.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Because the cost, as an example of Scientology, in the early days, it was considered to be expensive, but we're talking about $2 or $3 or $4,000. But now we're talking about a couple $100,000.
Yeah.
There's no way inflation went up. But what happened is, as it went on, and maybe in the beginning there was some altruistic thought that you're going to help people, but at the same time make a little bit of money.
Sure.
It just went overboard the other way, and now they don't even talk about people doing courses and the promotion that you'd get if you were a staff member, as I was for 26 and a half years. It's all about paying money to achieve the next honorary status. And this is a tremendous push to get money that way. And when the end result is just getting a lot more money, you know that everything has gone to hell in a handbasket.
Absolutely.
When you're talking about maybe making your life better, your children's life better, helping your fellow man, well, that's appealing to a lot of people, and it was to me. That's how I got in.
Absolutely. It's those kind of concepts with Scientology that those are probably the ones that most specifically made me initially think that Scientology was a cult, because you do have instances like Jonestown, like Rajneesh Puram. These are people who give up all their Waco. Waco is another good one. These people gave up their whole lives. They give up all of their earthly possessions in pursuit of this. And then, as I started learning about Scientology and, staff, like you were staff, you're paid a pittance, like barely anything, effectively nothing. You're giving up your life in pursuit of this specific goal, and the similarities are wild.
Well, I'll tell you, you got a point there, because your belief that you're going to help your fellow man is so strong that you kind of disregard the fact that you're getting so little pay and working tremendous hours. You think the harder you work, the more effective you're going to be.
Absolutely.
And it probably is the most clever cult that's ever existed. I think it's brilliant the way it was put together.
It's definitely up there. Yeah. It's and it's well, and the thing too, maybe this is to give Scientology credit, I suppose. It's so effective. It's so effective. I can't think, aside from any like mainstream religions, but I can't think of any cult that has reached the level of success that Scientology has.
Yeah. Well, it's on the downside now. It's hit its apogee, or whatever the word would be, the zenith, I guess.
Sure.
Back in the 90s, it was where the membership was very high, maybe 100,000. It was never in the millions. It's a pipe dream. The way they counted that was if anybody ever went in for a personality test or anything, they'd count them as a Scientologist. So,
do you think somebody in the chat was asking this question? I think it's a great question. L. Ron Hubbard, do you think that he was a true believer all the way through?
Well, I will give you an answer, and let me take it a little apart.
Okay.
Let me give you to you in little increments here. I think originally he did think starting a religion would make him more money. I think that's a true statement, where he said to somebody, the way to make money is to start your own religion. I think that's a very true statement.
Yeah.
Then what he did, and I can say this as an assumption on my part because I've read a lot of these books. In my book, which is right here, Ruthless, you want to buy a copy, it's there's books that I recommend at the end of this book.
Mm-hmm.
Read, and they were written by gentlemen in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and it's the New Thought movement.
Right.
And in those books, if you were to read them, you're going to find so many precepts and concepts that are in Scientology. It would blow you away. You wouldn't know if you never were in Scientology or studied it. But the reactive mind is brought up in there. Demons are brought up in there, and many other things. And I think he took this and actually thought that he could market this in a way that it would help people to get better. But at the same time, it would be a unique concept to make money. So it was a combination of two things. And then who was it? Right? Who was the guy that did the whole program on it? I forget the guy's name now.
Oh,
no, the guy that wrote the book. Sean, what was his name? I can't think of it.
What book?
About Scientology, along with the program that came out earlier on.
Going Clear?
Yeah, but
Debney?
no, not Gebney, the guy that wrote the book. Well, it doesn't matter. He wrote a book. And the guy wrote in the book, he says, the one thing I don't understand is this. He kept on doing research, and he couldn't figure out why he would do that. Well, what I think is this. L. Ron Hubbard would make promises that he had no concept of how to deliver them, and then he'd start studying all these various books written by other people to see if he could pick up something to make good on his word. Do you see what I'm saying? So when you say, did he believe in what he was doing? Yes, he believed in it to the degree that it would grow and he could make people better, but mainly to make more money.
right.
In other words, if you're keeping on coming up with new concepts, you're recycling the people to go further and further and further and spend more and more and more money. So I don't know if that's a definitive answer that you're looking for, but that's my take on it. And that's why he kept on doing research.
Yeah.
Lawrence Wright.
Lawrence Wright. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, did I answer your question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, now let's take up this. In Scientology, if you don't go by their rules anymore, or you talk out against them, or you criticize something, you could be excommunicated or kicked out and you're disconnected. Right. Okay? This is in other religions and cults also. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's very prevalent inside of religious cults. I mean, you know, it stems, I think a lot of it all stems down from notions of like excommunication, you know, being declared a heretic, or what in Scientology it's a suppressive person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Suppressive person.
Yeah. And this is really, really common. It's extremely damaging to a person, and especially to their family, if this happens in, say, like a communal living situation. There were many reports of people who left the Branch Davidians because they well, they were thrown out of the Branch Davidians because David Koresh found disfavor with them for some reason. They were booted out. They got lucky though. Those ones did.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. Rajneesh Brahm, you know, that was another one that was very heavy into it. I mean, these are people who build up whole societies, but it doesn't necessarily have to be as overt as that. You know, the notion of disconnection or unpersoning happens at all levels with cults. It could be something as simple as if you're in, say, one of the pseudoscience ones, just simply being banned from the page. And for some people, when they've taken not just these concepts, when they take something that really should just be a minor part of their life, and they now adopt it into a part of their personality and who they are. Even something as simple as that, that's your sense of belonging. That's your group. That's
Yeah.
who understands you. They share this secret knowledge, and now you're out.
Well, that is a point, because man, from the earliest days of his existence on this planet, tended to group together for their own protection, for their own survival.
Absolutely.
I mean, as an individual, you were not nearly as being able to protect yourself as if you were part of a group of maybe 10 or 20 or 30 people. So this was done as a survival method.
Oh, 100%.
To
Yeah.
get kicked out of that group meant, you weren't going to survive as well. Now, can it ever be lifted in other groups? Like in Scientology, they say that if you do the A to E, it isn't going to happen. You're not going to do it. You're not going to say, okay, mea culpa, mea culpa. It's all my fault. Everything, I lied about everything. You'd have to denigrate yourself into a piece of dog poo on the ground in order to get back in. In other cults, can you get back in if you get booted out?
It's pretty rare. One of the main aspects of cults is absolute devotion, absolute adherence, and slipping up even just a little bit can come with excessive penalties. It's horrifying how often you'll read up on cults like after the fact, and you'll hear instances of torture, maiming oneself. There was a cult, I think it's actually still in existence. There's a cult of this guy in California. I wish I could remember his name, but he was luring just a harem of women in, and he would brand them in all sorts of different punishments for different crimes. So to actually be thrown out is usually comes with a very severe finality, very, very severe finality. Not for the person who's thrown out. For them, there's nothing final about being thrown out. That's a damage that goes with them forever. But a cult that reinforces itself in this way, the whole notion of throwing them out is a finality, as in they are not even in existence anymore. They're not on our radar. We don't talk about them. We don't bring them up. It's very, very common.
Well, I'll tell you that's how it is in Scientology, because once your family is disconnected from you, you don't exist for them. I had a guest on, I guess it was last week, Rick Shaw, and he was disconnected from his family because he spoke out and he wanted to leave the church, and he was getting divorced, and he was going over to the house to get some of his clothes and things, and he walked in the house and he says, hello, and both of his daughters went in their bedroom and locked the door and wouldn't even acknowledge anything he said. So
wow,
it's just, yeah, it's final, it's done, it's over. That's how it is. Now, for him to get out, I mean, he's never going to do it. He'd have to commit himself to being a complete liar, and everything he said was wrong and the church was right. And this is pretty serious stuff. But I was just wondering, in other ones, like when you get disconnected, is it that final, or can you get back in? And the answer, I guess, is no, not really.
Not usually, no. The one thing that I find kind of interesting too is when it comes to pseudoscience cults, like we were spoken a little bit earlier, with pseudoscience cults, they're so prevalent. There's so many of them, and a person can be in several of them at once. And it's so easy with how interconnected that we are. If you get thrown out of one, it's actually rather easy for a person to just simply slip into the next one. And you'll even find in some weird cases, and I found this in several instances of my investigating quite a few of these groups, members who are thrown out because of a volatile personality, a volatile leader, cult leader, they'll band together and then they'll make their own. And then somebody will take up as leader of that. But they're still believing the same thing. They're still like, well, you need to put this burning caustic substance on your skin to burn a hole through your body to cure your cancer. Well, we didn't like how that person treated us, so now Now I'm the leader of our small little cult. By the way, keep burning holes in you and your family and your pets' bodies.
Wow.
'Cause, yeah,
No, I did not know that.
yeah, it's called bloodroot.
Hmm.
It's the most
So
bizarre thing.
almost like a disease, it spreads itself then.
It especially on the internet. Yeah, no, I think cult-like behaviors and cult-like you know what it is? A lot of it is because people have an inherent need, not just to have a group, but their group has to have a specific type of meaning. I think that's what a lot of people get really attracted to for this. It's the purpose behind it. With Scientology, it's, we're going to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
With other people, it's, we're going to save lives or cure this or cure that. It's very intoxicating. So this behavior, when one doesn't work or you fall out of favor with one, there's several cases of people being in like full blown religious cults and leaving one and joining up another.
Hmm.
Like, it's just it happens because it's inside the person. Like the main thing that really needs to be addressed when somebody is in a cult is their own psychology that's keeping them there. And when you're on the internet and you're falling for some of these types of groups, it's way too easy just to slip into another one without actually really examining what you were doing.
Wow. In other words, what you're saying, and I think you're right, is man is prone to getting involved in cults, isn't he?
Absolutely.
It's not like that's a foreign substance. It's almost like that's something that he thinks or she thinks this would be a good thing for me. It's got to be that, or it wouldn't be that prevalent.
Falling into it is so natural for certain people, and there are definitely some people that there are different. There are definitely psychological profiles that cults will specifically target as well. But if you fit that profile and they know how to utilize tactics like love bombing and all sorts of just shitty underhanded tactics, you can fall into it so naturally that you don't even notice.
Wow. Okay. Now look, here's another point though. Snitching, writing knowledge reports. I mean, this goes back, I don't know. I guess the earliest I've heard about it, and it was even before Scientology, was in Hitler's regime, where children and people would write reports on each other.
Oh
and
yeah.
give it to the Gestapo, and that was considered the greatest. Doing this was for the greatest good. Okay.
Mhm.
And in Scientology, it is a snitching culture where you write up your parents or your sister or your brother, and this is the way it is. Is this prevalent in other cults where they do that, or no?
It is. It depends a lot on how, I believe, personally interconnected they are. Like cults that are not organized around distance, like over the internet, I don't think is as bad. It can be. I've known a few instances of that happening, but I think that type of, because what that's all about, there's two parts to it. The first part is that this is about a cult's need, and usually the leaders need to maintain a very tight set of control.
Right.
Whereas from the cult perspective and how it's sold is almost, and they might not say it this way, but it's effectively what it means. It's maintaining a sense of purity,
Yeah.
For like the good example of the SS and inside the Nazi party, it's not just that they wanted purity of body, but they needed the purity of their party and their ideals. Lots of these cults will do that, and it's very common for cults to have enforcers, or people that are, like almost like a priest class. Some of these cults have effectively like a priest class that works directly underneath the leader, and these are the people who are gathering information, making sure that the integrity of this group maintains its consistency. It's very, very common.
Well, in Scientology, they have the ethics officer, and they have people like that who would gather these reports up and take you in for an interrogation. It's you live with it, and you think, okay, this is normal. It's not normal.
Right.
It's not normal.
Well, there's also if I'm not mistaken, with Scientology, they have detailed files of your sessions, you know, and for this is like a form of therapy for the person, you know, getting audited. That's right. I almost forgot for a second. But your auditing sessions are sold to you as a psychological maintenance, a spiritual enlightenment. But then all of the worst details of your life are being cataloged, and that right there is a brilliant form of control.
Listen, your sessions are videotaped. They are recorded. All the words you were saying is on a recording machine. And so every session that you ever get, they have the complete details of it. Plus they have a written write-up that the auditor would write down.
Man.
And you accept this. But in other words, this isn't done overnight. This is done over a period of time.
Right.
And in the very beginning, when this is being done, you don't know that this is going to be recorded. And maybe some of these earlier sessions are helpful to you in realizing some of the things that you might be a little sorry about. You kind of forgive yourself, as an example, or realize you were wrong on something and now you're right. So it's helpful. So you spill your guts because you figure, you know, I'm getting cleaned up. It's like, and I've told this many times on the program, I was raised as a Catholic. And there was a priest there, Father Zidanovich. He's going to live in memory now because he was from Poland. This is in Pennsylvania. And when you went to confession in the church, there would be lines, tremendous amount of people waiting for him. And the other priest who would read you the riot act if he told them a sin, there was one person waiting. So you'd go into Father Zidanovich and you'd confess your sins. And at the end, because he understood maybe half of what you said, he said, that's nice. Say 5 Our Fathers and 5 Hail Marys. You're forgiven. And as a kid, I felt good. I felt, look, I got a new start. I'm going to try to be a better kid. It did actually have a therapeutic effect on me.
Sure.
That I figure I could get started fresh. He didn't record me and have a goddamn video camera on me as he was doing this to use later on, which is what the Church of Scientology does. But anyway, I guess it's pretty unique to them, the detail that they go into as far as recording this, isn't it?
I think so. I've never heard of any group being so incredibly detailed. I would be fascinated. I'm sure anybody who knows where it is never going to reveal it, but I would be fascinated to know how many data centers or servers they have with all this stuff compiled and cataloged. It's mind-boggling to me. The amount that they must have completely cataloged. It's just.
And then how about the written records, the folders of the auditors' worksheets? Tremendous amount of energy is put into this. As a matter of fact, I tell you, between categorizing all the things that you could be called out for and pressing people to pay more money to increase their status in the church, these are the two major things that is carried on by the Church of Scientology these days.
Right.
And it isn't auditing people to make them better. There was a course that was delivered back in the 60s called the St. Hill Special Briefing Course. And this was a course of about 400 and some lectures delivered by L. Ron Hubbard on the various aspects of auditing. That course is no longer even offered to be delivered.
Wow.
And in those days, what he said to make more money is deliver more Scientology, which, in other words, you know, if you're going to make money, make more of a product that people are getting something for their money so they don't feel they're being screwed over. That course isn't even available now. Now, you know what, straight out, give us your money.
You know what I think is so interesting too? If we're using the analogy of confession with auditing, and so in confession, you're supposed to be going in there, you state your sin to be absolved. Effectively, you're going in and you're asking for the sin to be washed away. You got to do something and you do something, but the sin is washed away. It's removed. But in auditing, and this has got to be probably one of the reasons I find Scientology, and I don't usually use this word, I really don't, but I think it's evil. I legitimately think it's evil. For this reason, is probably one of the biggest reasons, is when you go in for an auditing and you're stating all of your pain and your anguish and all the things that have happened to you, You're trying to get psychologically good. You're trying to get clear. That pain or your sins, those aren't washed away. They take them and they keep them. There is no absolution in any of this. They take that and now they have control. That's the most evil goddamn thing I've ever heard in my life. It's insane.
I think you have every right to call it evil, because it is. There are literally hundreds of people who have lost their families, who have taken second and third mortgages on their homes and lost their homes, used up college education funds for their children to promote buying a new building, because that's this push right now is to get every org ideal. And these orgs are just beautiful. They just cost a ton of money. The people who live in the area are pushed to donate to build this edifice. And when it's done, it's filled with air.
Yep.
I mean, Mark Headley used to go around, and I had him on a program earlier on. He used to go around and put in systems. And he said in every one of the orgs, when he went out to put the systems in, systems meaning videos that a person could come in and watch some aspect of Scientology in an audio visual style rather than having somebody talk and explain it verbally.
Right.
He'd put in this, he says, one for one. They were all empty. There was nobody in these buildings. So that's what they're pushing. And they're pushing getting your sins, using it against you to control you. Okay. Now, what would you say is the common denominator, the traits of all cults? Could you just enumerate these, do you think, or is that?
Sure. And it's not necessarily an absolute list, because there's always outliers, but I think the most common ones that they all share is a cult is usually based around either a person or a concept, and this concept is usually something, or person is usually something that is very much outside the norm. This is outsider concepts. This is not only just because this is a concept that's either being sold or is then being used for manipulation, societal control, but also because it fundamentally creates a difference between the devotee and people who are not inside the group. You know, there is a distinct difference. There is a very real sense of otherism. This helps to, I want to use the word dehumanize people who are outside, but I think it's less that. It's more you can sometimes they'll instill a sense of either pity on others or hatred on others.
Yeah.
And that usually depends on how much they're trying to be an inclusive or exclusive cult. Their tactics are all usually very similar. Love bombing is a very common one where, you know, if you even show a little bit of an interest, you know, they're overwhelmed, they're bombarded with support, with people trying to say, yes, you were doing the right thing. Yes, this is why this is the best thing possible. And it's the same thing as getting into a narcissistic personality disorder relationship, an abusive narcissistic relationship. Love bombing and love bombing and love bombing. Next comes the cost. On top of that, they usually all have very rigid structures, and disobedience is not very tolerated. New ideas are very, very rarely, if ever, tolerated in a cult. For instance, the Jilly Juice one, anybody who has a suggestion on a better way to do it is met with banning and you know, exorcism from the group immediately, you know, because it's only this concept, the leader has dictated how it's supposed to be. So dissension is just not allowed. And as far, there was one more that I had. I would say isolation is probably the other one that I think is very nefarious and very common. Isolation as in, and it doesn't have to necessarily be you leaving society, but you're isolating yourself from a challenge, right? So a good example is if somebody can if somebody can convince you that the most important thing that you can do is believe in this, and the counter to it is, say, mainstream science, well, they have a good way to isolate you, and that's to fill your head full of doubt on why you can't trust mainstream science. Other ones are things like you can't trust the government, you can't trust this, you can't trust that. These are the enemy, and they're a direct challenge.
So, in other words, well, not in other words, but in so many words, you think the major one is developing an us versus them?
100%. I think that is the number one defining factor of a cult taking form.
Yeah, yeah, because that is prevalent in Scientology. It's us, and it's not necessarily versus, but the person who's a non-Scientologist is called a wog. In other words, or raw meat, they would call them.
A wog.
Yeah. Well, there's an old story about there's some Marine back in, God, the 30s, I guess, who's in the Far East. And this Chinese person says, "Why do you call us wogs?" And it was used in those days. And he says, "Well, it means swarthy Oriental gentleman," which is it's bullshit. They didn't mean that at all. But the guy was fast on his feet, and he came up with a quick answer, you know. But like in Scientology, it's us when we're trying to help them. They're uninitiated, they're unenlightened, they don't know their true path to spiritual freedom is us.
Right.
So, but those who would counter us are, well, as an example, the church raided the United States government and stole stuff from it. And
oh, yeah.
some people in the Guardian's office went to prison. So they'll go after people and who are against it and try to wipe them out and destroy them. And the other people, they want to get them in and supposedly to help them, but it's mostly to get their money.
Yeah. Well, their battle with
I'm sorry.
their battle with the IRS is a great example of that too. I mean, that wasn't just an us versus them, but it also was utilizing one of the most potent and powerful social collaterals there are. That's persecution.
Yeah.
That's how they sold it. We're being persecuted by the IRS and the government, and that's a great way to get people on their side, make them sympathetic.
Yeah, that's right. But actually with the IRS, there was another tool they used, and I don't know if you knew this, Jeff. There was hundreds of people who filed a lawsuit against the IRS, and the IRS had no money in the budget to cover lawsuits.
Oh, wow.
So you had hundreds of people doing this, and then it was made known that if they were more amenable to the demands of the church to become a religion, those lawsuits could be turned off, and they were turned down, and that opened up the door to getting them.
The blackmailed the IRS?
Yeah, exactly.
Man, maybe I should do that. My taxes are terrible.
Well, okay, so now I guess I think we covered everything. Let me ask you this. You have a pecking order in what you consider to be the most dangerous ones. Would you give me an idea on that or no?
The most dangerous ones. I think probably the most dangerous cult is the one that you don't hear about. It also depends on what specifically you're talking about. When you're talking about like a religious cult, these smaller cults, even upwards to larger ones like Jonestown and Rajneeshpuram, these are dangerous. These are dangerous cults, and they can ruin your life, and they can convince you into suicide or just outright kill you. I mean, these things do happen.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about on the scale of overall harm, you have to look at the very real effects and how far they spread. I'd say Scientology is in the top 5 easily, if not the number 1. But there are so many of them that, and like the ones that I make videos on my channel, these people who are convinced into taking poison or giving poison to their children, or there's one called 10-month mamas. This is the most bizarre one I've ever heard. These are women who cheer each other on when they get pregnant to try and stave off their labor, stave off giving birth as long as possible, believing this is going to make the baby healthier. And what this actually does is drastically and exponentially increase the chance of a stillbirth. These are women literally cheering each other on to kill their children.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So I mean, like, and that's the thing that's so frustrating about these types of cult behaviors is on Scientology you have one that rips people off, it wrecks lives, it destroys families all over the world. And then you have something that you don't even realize might be that nefarious, but is convincing very gullible people to literally kill themselves. And they don't even realize that they're doing it. They don't even realize that it's a cult. They just think it's a health fad,
Yeah.
you know. And that's why these things are so incredibly similar in their psychology and how they work. And it's fascinating.
It is. Well, I guess if you wanted to put a couple little guidelines here to help people to avoid it, is if you're getting involved in something and you feel yourself being in some degree alienated from a regular life, in other words, a life as most people live, and getting into a more disciplined, esoteric type thing where what you may gain from it is something way out of the ordinary, way hard to believe, you're probably heading for a cult, aren't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think probably the thing that I suggested to everybody actually, but I think would probably help a lot with not falling into a cult-like ideology is if you're presented with information and it sounds good, you feel like you're starting to adopt this to the core part of your being, seek out counter information, seek it out, consume that information, try and understand as much as you can all angles of what you're getting into before you actually get into it. And even then, I mean, you know, some people will still fall. They'll still get sucked in.
Well, you know, this is the old way. Well, it's not an old way. It's a pretty new way since the internet. If you're going to buy a product, you go on there and see what other people have said about it.
Absolutely.
You see what I'm saying? So if you're getting involved in some particular group, you could go on the internet and say, okay, well, what has this group produced? Well, if they produce successful people, and you can get in touch with some of these people and say, well, how did it help you? Or if you get on there and say, this is the worst goddamn thing I ever got involved in. I mean, it'd be one way that you could help yourself to not get involved.
Maybe I should make a website, cultreview.com.
There you go. Well, okay, Jeff has, go on, Sean.
Okay, so you have one super chat from Red Scare for $5. He says, I'm going to be using ongoingness. I hope these $5 cover the licensing fee.
Is it Jeff? What's the guy's name?
Red.
Red.
Yeah.
Red. Wow. Red, I got to tell you something totally off the wall. I have a brother. Well, I had a brother. He died maybe 7 years ago. And his name was Anthony Miscavige Jr. He had red hair. I called him Red my whole life. So when you say the name Red, it brings up my brother's name. And unbelievably, listen to this. He used to call me Sam. It has nothing to do with my name. So I was known as Sam to him. To me, he was known as Red. Other people called him Tony, but that was my nickname for him. Anyway, thank you. And I will use the word ongoingness. So meanwhile, those of you who you felt you got educated a little bit by this or enlightened, I'd appreciate it if you were to become a Patreon. And it does help the ongoingness of this program. And just go on to my website, therealronmiscavige.com, and you can contribute whatever you'd like. But I do appreciate all the help, and I can tell you this. It's a simple way for you to become a participant instead of only a spectator. And there's nothing wrong if you don't do it. Don't get me wrong that I'm trying to, make you wrong if you don't do it. But in watching it, you're not really participating, except you're getting knowledge that I'm trying to pass on to you. And with our brilliant guests, it'll help you in your life. And by contributing a little bit, then you're actually participating in this whole push I'm doing. So meanwhile, Jeff, I got to tell you, I really appreciate you coming on today. And I don't know, maybe in the future we might talk about something else. I don't know what, but
Absolutely.
thank
No,
you very much.
I'd be more than happy to. I'm always happy to talk to you, Ron.
Okay, Jeff, thank you very much. And that's it from me. I'm Ron Miscavige. This is Life After Scientology. I'll see you on the next episode.